All right, guys. Well, first of all, we just want to welcome everyone. Sorry if you heard us rambling on a little bit just with getting everything up and rolling here, but big thank you to everyone who's obviously tuning into the event, or obviously if you may catch this in your own time. My name's Matthew Powell. I'll be the host for today. I'm one of the applied sports scientists here at Catapult Sports, working across our Major League Soccer and college sports here in America. And I thought I'd just sort of set the scene by providing some context just around how we actually arrived at this event. And what I might just say is we're really grateful to have such a large representation of football being soccer clients across North America and certainly across the globe. And I think through this opportunity to work with a multitude of football clients in particular, we're exposed to a lot of different environments. And as a part of these environments, they're all different by design. And I think that's really due to a multitude of reasons, whether that's through human resources and funding or just general knowledge in particular areas of sports science and data application. So that's as a part of our role and certainly our continual development in the industry. We here at Catapult, in a multitude of departments, from business development through to data science, product development and marketing, we're really just continually discussing how we can develop our practitioners and provide some further innovation, whether that's through wearable technology and live monitoring, or certainly through video integration. I think especially if you have been across the news, Catapult News specifically, with the acquisition of the SBG platform, which we're really fired up and excited about. We've got about 75% of the EPL market through to the Bundesliga League and the MLS currently using that product, which I think is going to go to another level. So, but more specifically, with this event, we think it's a really important conversation with the multitude of practitioners that we have in the industry. And we've really targeted some practitioners with a vast array of experience and exposure, starting from the pathway system of Philadelphia Union Academy practitioner in Walter Grandes, through to certainly today's practitioners in Dr. Felix Proessl and Frank Barone from Pitt University. And that leads also into a couple of weeks, which will be the head of the UEFA Fitness, Dr. Paul Bolson. And the last one who'll wind up the series is more so the recent Canadian Women's Soccer Championship head of performance in Dr. Cesar Milan. So if you can please keep an eye out for those upcoming events. Again, don't forget to sign up. We're really excited to bring those obviously to the industry. But as I mentioned today, we're going to kick off with our friends from Pitt, who have been long-time clients of ours, obviously to talk through their personal departments and certainly provide our listeners with the context of how Catapult fits into their multitude of monitoring and surveillance systems. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try and keep this as interactive as we possibly can and fire off some questions to the guys. But yeah, certainly want to encourage that. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to the guys to introduce their backgrounds rather than me doing it. And again, guys, we know you've had a big day out there at Pitt, and we're really excited to hear from you. So thanks again, guys. I'll pass it over to you, Felix, to share your presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, Matthew. Thanks for leading us off here. We are certainly excited to be here today. Before we get started, can anybody see the screen?
Yeah, I think we're pretty good. That's coming up well, man.
Awesome.
Good.
So you want me to skip these slides? Or?
Yeah, there was just a couple of slides for my apologies, just in terms of the workflow there. But we did have obviously just a couple of quick shout outs with regards to some of our technology based around our Vector S7 and our goalkeeping pods. So there's some specific algorithms. If you're not familiar with those, we'd certainly encourage you to reach out to whether it's through our business development team or through our team of sports scientists. strongly encourage you to certainly get some more information about those. We put a lot of work and development into those, and particularly with our new heart rate feature as well. So thanks very much.
All right. So yeah, my name is Felix Proessl. I'm here today with Frank Barone. We're here at Pitt. I'm not quite a doctor yet. I appreciate that, but on my way there, I'm a doctoral research fellow, PhD student in the Neuromuscular Research Lab here at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm currently also serving for the men's soccer team as a sports scientist. My background, I was a collegiate athlete myself, played soccer. I'm originally from Germany, came over. And while I was an undergrad, I did a lot of internships at soccer teams back home, which is kind of around that time where all of this, load monitoring ideas started. And so that always fascinated me, which essentially led me to pursue further education in exercise science with a master's at Colorado State, and now the PhD here at Pitt. Obviously, at the same time, applying some of my skill set that I've gained from the more practical side in the laboratory in terms of data analysis, cleaning, visualization, that sort of stuff, in the applied settings here with the team. And so I've been part of Pitt Soccer for 3 years now. This is my 4th year, and it's been a fun road. I don't know, Frank, if you want to give your spiel.
Yeah, hey guys. My name is Frank Barone. I'm currently serving as a strength and conditioning coach here at the University of Pittsburgh. This is my 2nd year with the men's group. My background, similar to Felix, in the way that I was a collegiate athlete, worked at a few universities, as well as at the pro level with San Antonio FC before coming to Pitt. And yeah, so that's me in a nutshell. Felix will be driving the ship today, but I'll be here to bounce some ideas off of if need be.
All right, so but when we get started and talk about Pitt Soccer, I think it's first important to kind of paint the picture of what Pitt Soccer really is. What a student athlete encounters when he's at Pitt, because unlike many other things, like professional sports, for instance, student athletes are not only with us the 2 hours of practice. There's an obligation to grow these young men into adults, give them an education in addition to just the athletic side. So on a day-to-day basis, they interact with a multitude of people, ranging from academic advisors to life skills staff, obviously our coaches, Jay, Michael, and Rich. And then there's the support staff. So Frank is here with me today. Auburn's our nutritionist, Sam, our athletic trainer, me kind of overseeing some of the sports science side of things, and then Ed, our equipment manager. What's important is not only does this highlight that, there's many people involved in all of the decisions and everything and day-to-day flow, but there is kind of an applied hierarchy in this, in that everything is based off of the philosophy of the coaching staff, essentially. So everything we do is to support the philosophy of the coaches, to play the football we want to play. And for us in particular, that means possession-based, high-press football, which, as we'll get to in a second here, dictates a lot of the decision, dictates a lot of the ways we look at data, interpret data, and the questions that we ask. So I guess this is just to set the tone. What we're going to show today is the work of a lot of people, ranging from multiple fields. But the beauty of it is, altogether, we're trying to maximize how we operate and improve the chances of winning games. To then explain a little bit more about the collegiate settings, because some of the people in the audience may not be as familiar with how that works in the US. In college and collegiate soccer, we play a lot of games and not a lot of time. So in this season in particular, just a regular season, we play 15 games in 65 days. So that's on average 1 game about every 4 days. So it's not like the most traditional common European model where unless you're a top-notch team and compete internationally, you only have one game a week. This forces us to really put together good session plans, maximize the recovery of our guys coming off of a game, and then really utilizing every minute that we have with the guys. What this also shows is that there's a lot of travel involved. So there's another contextual factor. A lot of these games are more than 4 hours away, but if you only have 3 days in between games, that means that you got to take into consideration a lot of factors when you plan your sessions. The other thing is 15 games in 65 days. That's just a regular season. On top of that, the most important phase of the year actually just starts. So after that, we have the conference tournaments, ACC tournaments, and then finally the NCAA tournament. So the most important phase of the year is actually towards the end of this. So we got to do all our best to ensure that we maximize performance late in the year and mitigate injuries so that we have available players by the end of the year.
Sorry, Felix, if I just ask a question, you've obviously mentioned being there for 4 years. How have you found just I suppose, through the philosophy and really over that 4 years of continuum, the depth of those questions? What is that really, the direction, I suppose, from a sports science perspective? How's that really shaped to complement the coach's direction as well? How have you really found the evolution of that?
Yeah, very good question. So it's been a little bit tricky because last year we kind of operated under a different model due to COVID, where we did have more the traditional European model of 1 game per week, which was great because it gave us a lot more flexibility in terms of structuring practice, the way we traditionally think about it. But just to start off, to go back to your question, early on, a lot of our conversations among the staff were based on the tactical principles, the tactical periodization that we pursue, because it was of interest to align the physical periodization, the physical ideas that we like to think are important for athletic development, for adequate recovery, overloading the guys, all those good principles, to align those to the tactical plans of the coaching staff. And so during the session or during a regular season schedule, we usually, and you'll see that in a second here too, talk about things in terms of the amount of days we're away from a game day rather than a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, just because the schedule is really wild and often inconsistent across weeks. During the COVID year, which was pretty nice, we were able to restructure our training sessions a little bit so that we could progressively taper into the week, have a kind of what we like to call an endurance session on Wednesday, so kind of an acquisition day from an athletic development perspective, then taper back into game day on Saturday, recovery Sunday, restart the week. So overall, the way we derived questions were all based on, our general principle of what we want to accomplish tactically. Does that answer the question?
That's great. Yeah, and I think just with regards to obviously Frank, especially your transition into college as well, how have you found the core differences, I suppose, physically and really philosophically from a strength and conditioning standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, as Felix put it, last year was a lot easier to answer some of those questions. When you have 6 days between games, there's room for it. Becomes a little bit trickier to find it with 2 or 3. But yeah, I think it's very dependent upon days from and days to a game, and that's really how we look at that. And most importantly, that it never takes away from what the coaches plan to do out on the pitch. If we can stimulate it out on the pitch, that's the best. If we have to add some supplemental out in the weight room, then even better. But never in a way that it'll take away from the overall goal of winning games.
Thanks, Mark.
So I guess to follow up on that then, given that it's important to monitor loads and really make sure that what we're doing is in alignment with our tactical prioritization. Obviously, the question is, how do we do that, and what do we use to accomplish that? There's a lot of stuff involved, but for today, I'm really just focusing on 3 things because those are the ones that we most commonly use. Those are the ones from a sports science perspective that we most commonly share with the coaching staff, interact with across different domains of the performance team, quote unquote. And that is subjective wellness questionnaires, obviously our load monitoring via GPS, and then body composition measures. We take those at varying rates throughout the year. Wellness questionnaires are sent out every single day to the guys. They just answer a set of 10 questions on their smartphone. That's being relayed back to us. Obviously, every training session and every match is being monitored with the vector units now. And then about 3 times per semester, we also perform together with Auburn, our nutritionist, the body composition measures, so that we get an idea of what the lifestyle progression, so to speak, is of our guys during season, in the off season, and when they come back, what that looks like. We funnel all that information through open source software in R or Python, combine it, and then through that structure our reporting scheme across coaching staff, athletic trainer, Frank, and oftentimes Auburn. So that's kind of the basic overview of the measures that we do or measures that we take and how that works. To dive into that a little bit further, then, if we were to look into a typical day, it's not always like that. There's some deviations depending on travel. Like I said, I also work in the lab, so oftentimes my time is restricted there too. But in general, the way we like to work, the way we envision this to go, and the way we have been operating is the wellness questionnaire is being populated at 6 a.m. at the guy's smartphone. So whenever they wake up, they fill it out. Usually they report it to the facility by at the latest 7:30, because training starts at 8:30. Oftentimes we have video at 8, which gives us essentially an hour and a half or 2 hours, depending on whether or not we do video, to analyze the subjective information from the guys that they're reporting, share it across staff members, and then fine tune some of the ideas that we had for today's training session. So Jay, Rich, and Michael usually come in with some thoughts about what we believe is the most important thing to do from a technical perspective. We have an idea altogether what we want to accomplish from a physical perspective, and it's not about dictating what drill we're going to do. It's more about how we're going to execute a set of drills that we all believe in fulfill the physical and tactical requirements for the day. As I'll show you in a second, some of those things can include, the dimensions that we do certain drills in, the number of players we put into different spaces, that sort of thing, rather than, okay, we're going to play 4v4+3 rather than a 7v7 today. So then we practice. At times, we're back in the weight room after that. Not always. Sometimes we do stuff on the pitch. Frank can elaborate on that. But essentially, what we want to have an idea of what today's session was. So either we have an initial training report, oftentimes, or when I can't be there in person, we live monitor so we can share that information instantly, and then essentially the guys train either in the weight room or Frank does stuff on the pitch with them, and then they go to class afterwards. The day progresses. We get a medical report after treatment to tell us the numbers that are of guys that are available for the next session tomorrow, which obviously again influences what we're going to be able to do, yada yada yada. So that often results in an informal staff meeting. So that can just be text messages, phone calls, group text. It's not everybody sitting here in the office and we're chatting because we got nothing else to do at 9 p.m. but it's kind of an informal discussion across members of the team. And then the cycle starts again the next day. To put this in kind of a visual perspective, because I realize a lot of people are probably interested in, how does that communication really look like and what's being shared? How do we share information between people, etc. This is kind of an example of one of those wellness reports that we put together every morning. Essentially, it just indicates us, the RPEs, so the ratings of perceived exertion of the guys, how they rated the previous session, whether they thought it was tough on a scale from 1 to 10, so modified Borg scale. We asked them how many hours they slept, how many meals they've eaten, how stressed out they are, how fatigued they are, soreness levels, all on a scale from 1 to 10, kind of typical wellness questionnaire information. We flag individual scores that are concerning, but that is the input. As we put together the session plan, this is an example of what that looks like from Jay's end. Michael and Rich all together come up with an idea of what we believe is the most important tactical plan. And again, that's where we then maybe take out a rep or two, add a rep if we feel like we're more fresh than expected. Sort of make those last little decisions to really come up with a convincing and final session plan. This is an example of us using a Jumbotron on the field to show some either data, video, whatever, to the guys. At times we do that on the field, at times we do that in the video room here. That may include data, it may not. It may only include concepts that we think are important. It can just be philosophical at times as well. Like I said, we have an automated export from OpenField. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a quick and immediate solution to share information across stakeholders. But then we, as the day progresses, we go in, clean that information. If a guy's missing their heart rate monitor during the day, we don't want that to influence our trim scores, for instance, etc. And then provide a more granular analysis down the road. This is an example of the medical report that Sam, the trainer, puts together, which again just symbolizes it's communication across multiple people as we're all trying to maximize the next session in efforts to ensure the adequate recovery, but also provide an adequate stimulus if possible. Frank, do you have anything you wanted to chime in on?
I think we'll probably go into how we may adjust some of those loads, so I'll save that for that point.
Okay, cool. So let's dive right into this then, right? So one of the things that I really like about using Catapult is the fact that we can go in and clip individual drills rather than just an entire gross session. So if we, for instance, were to take a hypothetical example of a session, warm up followed by some EPE, some sprints, positional possession game, and then let's say we wanted to do 3 reps of an 11v11 match. Some of those decisions where we weigh in is, like I said, the dimensions of the field. So to illustrate that point, we're just going to make it really simple here. We could either perform the drill over a full field, so shaded in blue here, or we could play 11v11 in half field. The question then is, how does it impact physical performance, and why would we choose one over the other? Well, if we look at play load as an indication of the intensity, for instance, or high-speed distance as an indication of the number of actions with high intensity the guys have, we can see that even though the intensity is similar, So with the full field shaded in blue, the half field shaded in yellow, play load is similar across positions, whereas high speed distance is generally greater, not surprisingly, when we play the full field compared to the half field. That's uniform across all positions. But what that essentially means from our perspective is, let's say it's a game day -3. It is an opportunity to overload the guys, provide a stimulus. We may prefer to choose a full field, whereas on the game day -1, day before a match, we believe we need to play because we need to study some tactical principles, but we don't really want to overload the guys. We don't want them to be sore the next day. Well, it may be a better idea to go half field, knowing that the main intensity remains the same, but the high speed distance is reduced. We can apply the same logic not to the size of the pitch, but to the number of players in the same size. So we can either vary the number of players in a given space, or we vary the space with the same number of players. And so this is just an example where we took the same spacing, but instead of playing 6v6 plus 2, we played 7v7 plus 2. You know, again, not very surprising, but when you put more players into the same amount of space, that gives each of them less room to move in, meaning that they cover less distance, and that also affects, as you can see, the play load here, but not high speed distance and not the number of acceleration and decelerations as indicated by the IMAs. So again, if it's game day -1, those are some considerations that we take into account. What is the physical impulse that we want to elicit, and then how can we vary the dimensions or the numbers to accommodate that goal?
Just a question on that buy-in and really just the understanding of the coaches, I suppose, language around the GPS data in particular. How have you found, just in terms of their general understanding, and obviously that may have grown over time as well, but is there any ways you recommend going about the presentation of that, or just obviously education of that as well?
Yeah, good question. I begin by saying that I'm lucky, first of all, to work with an open-minded staff. That's not always the case. You know, it's a lot easier to get buy-in when you have people that are trying to become better and work at the cutting edge. Jay himself also has a master's in sports science, so that's helpful. You know, it shows that he's interested in that sort of question. But I guess the one thing that's very important, and was very clear from the beginning, that you know, I don't think presenting absolute data without comparison ever really makes a whole lot of sense. There's certain instances where it does make sense if you describe a good versus bad session. But again, the importance really for me is always drawing comparisons between drills, between days, between positions. It's not as much about the absolute distance that players cover, the absolute high speed distance that players cover. It's about, does the winger cover more high speed distance than the center mid? And do we elicit the same type of response in each of those drills? Because if we base all our decisions on the fact that we want to simulate a match, it would be important to practice accordingly and make sure that our wingers in fact do have more high speed distance exposure than our center mids. Same logic applies to game, the different days of the week. It's really irrelevant whether we have 500 meters, 800 or 1,800 meters of high speed distance if each of those days are always the same. Really what matters is that 800 is a lot because on a recovery day, we have 50 or 100 or 200 meters of high speed distance. So it's all about putting things in perspective. I think overall, by doing that, as a staff, we've gained a lot more, a better understanding of what a 500 really means, because initially play load, is a quite complicated variable derived from the sum of multiple accelerations. It's arbitrary units, so it's not as straightforward as you may think about it. But through comparisons, I think that it all made a lot more sense as a staff. One of the things where absolute numbers do matter, though, so that's kind of ironic, is when a conversation essentially that Frank and I often have. So when we go about our daily business, and let's say we have 2 games a week, reality is that 11 guys are starting those 2 games, and with substitutions, maybe there's a total of 14, 15 guys that are actually going to get playing time. Not all 25, 28, however many players everybody has on their team will have exposure to high-speed distance actions. But if we play twice a week, that means we have 5 days left. 1 day has to be an off day. 4 of those days are left that really are no longer acquisition days, which means if the guys that don't play, they're missing out on important time for athletic growth. And so one of the things we started doing a lot is kind of going back after a week and saying, hey, what is the deficit between those that played a lot of minutes and those that did not play a lot of minutes? Like I said, we value a high press, physical game. And so high speed distance is an important metric for us. So what that means for Frank and I is that's always in our interest to provide additional loads, additional exposure to high speed distance to those guys that don't get a lot during the game. And so just to provide you an example, comparing a preseason game to an ACC matchup, that high speed distance varies from game to game. It's not uniform across games. A lot of factors play a role. Is it a counterattack based game? More possession based game, and you can even go further and stratify it across positions. So here you see a typical high speed distance coverage of different positions during our match play, and again the wingers cover by far the most high speed distance. So then when we go in, and primarily that's the work of Frank, then exposing the guys to high speed distances. The conversation that we have is, how many reps of EPEs, of sprints, of yardage of high speed distance should we expose them to in order to compensate or match that deficit, but not overload them, knowing that we have another game in 2 weeks already. So anything you want to chime in there, Frank, we appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, as Felix said, it's important that we match those up, but the secondary thing that we always have to understand, especially in a season like this, is we're probably 2 days from the next game as well. So the further away from the game coming up that we can provide the stimulus, the better. If we can do it on the game day somehow, if it's a travel group and a non-travel group, we'll try to do that on the game day to keep them on the same schedule. Once we get that, Felix and I can have a conversation based on what we elicited from that day and see if we need to supplement, if we don't need to supplement. And then the last piece of that is if we do run into split groups during the training session, where it may be a recovery day for the 11 or the 14 that played, then there's another group that's training that we need to understand where everybody is and what we're going to get and how we might need to again, simulate some of that high speed distance. So we sat here 2 days ago and had this exact conversation, and it turned out to be the group that was with me that didn't travel provided a smaller stimulus. The group that did travel, that didn't play, had a bit of a larger stimulus. The group that traveled, that did play, we didn't do it really at all for that group. So it's wrapping your head around where each of your players are and seeing what you can give them.
I think what's important to emphasize there, and that's kind of a general philosophy of mine, is that it's not like we're sitting here and then we look at data and we say, oh, we have to do this. Like, it's not a data-driven decision. It's a data-informed decision. It's saying, this is what the game exposure was. We are a day in advance already from that day. It's a way different situation. It's game day -2, no longer game day -4. How can we best utilize this information to then fine tune again, not choose what we're doing, but fine tuning what we think is best to do with our guys. And I think that that's really important, because I think oftentimes sports science gets a little bit of a bad rep in terms of, just being the guys that are annoying and just want to, prove everybody wrong, but that's not what it is. It's just about helping make better decisions and providing the context so that good decisions can be made.
I think that's a really great point, Felix. And I suppose just to unwind a little bit further, going back to really COVID with that schedule for last year, did you find yourself, or have you previously even tried to push the envelope with high-speed running and seen any ramifications with that as well from an injury perspective? And the second part of that is, you mentioned obviously a bit of your philosophy now. How has that really grown in terms of creating more robust athletes?
So to answer the first part of the question, I would say there's times where we do have overload or acquisition days, even in busy, congested match schedule like the fall semester, because there are days or weeks where we only have one match. So mid-season, for instance, we generally have a week where we only have one game. And so then where in a previous week there would have been a game day, this is usually where it ends up becoming somewhat of a tougher session, not quite like a match day, but that is an acquisition day. And we do induce high-speed distance either artificially or one thing that I really enjoyed that came out of collaboration with Jay and all of the guys is, incorporating some of those things into active drills. So oftentimes, we simulate linear runs, but then we can also introduce them by playing a ball over the top, and that's how we load the drill. Guys chasing the ball, and then starting whatever drill we would have started anyway, rather than starting from the scratch. One of the assistant coaches initiates it, and I think that, to go to your philosophy, I think if anything, that has been really been impactful on my end, because I think oftentimes we think of, sports specific training as a little bit too complicated, in that, we need to create all this stuff in order to essentially simulate what a game would look like. But it can't just be as simple as, okay, we're going to start the drill differently. Instead of giving our center mid the ball to play the first pass, we're just going to play a long ball. Everybody's going to chase it. And then we're going to start with our center back starting the drill. Okay. But doing that, we know that we do elicit more high-speed distance. And yeah, I would say that's been really impactful on my philosophy.
How's that buy-in, Frank, in terms of giving the guys top-up sessions and so forth? They're certainly, their attitude and their mindset towards that is all obviously very professional, the way they go about it.
Yeah,
I can hear.
I lost you there for a second. Yeah, no, we're lucky in that regard that that we're all on the same page with why we're doing it. We have a roster that can all compete to play, so they know where they're at, and if they're a week out, they might be in the next week if they prove themselves. So yeah, we're lucky in that regard for sure.
And I would say, relaying the information to the student athletes is helpful in that regard too. It's not just, the coach, the strength and conditioning coach or a sports scientist giving them a subjective statement saying, hey, well, you're not fit, or you need to make this up. Showing them the data of, okay, this is how much high speed distance you've had last week, and this is how much high speed distance, your counterpart that's starting had. If you want to be in their shoes, it's probably a good idea to try to match that and stay fit, so that when you get the chance, you can get in. So I think that's been helpful in that regard too. Not that, obviously the subjective input isn't valuable, it really is, but it just provides another layer to strengthen the thought that you want to relay.
Just in terms of live monitoring, talk us through the solutions that you're using there for every practice session as well.
And when you say solutions, what are you referring to?
Are you using mostly the console, or are you using more so the iPad for where you guys are at?
Yeah, so we we actually just recently made the switch to the iPad. So we started to do initially everything on a laptop when we had the optimized system. Switching over to the vector units, we've started to integrate the iPad more. I wouldn't say that it's been fully implemented to its full capacity at this point. But I think that's where we are trying to head, especially with, something we haven't talked about at all, but return to play. I think it can provide a lot of very helpful insight for when training individual guys on the sidelines, rather than, the holistic team. Usually that's a more static decision that had already been made before we start the session. There may be room for, okay, do we do another rep or not? But in general, I would say the majority of that decision making is already completed by the time we start the session. Whereas for, return to play, I think there's a lot of insight that can be gained from, live feedback of their heart rate, just accomplishing, certain goals in their phase of return to sports. Because oftentimes there we do drills that aren't as well categorized. One of the things, again, by splitting sessions into drills and doing it repeatedly over time, being consistent with the drills that we do perform, we do get kind of a good idea of, analyzing data retrospectively, what that drill looks like from a physical perspective. A lot of times the drills that we do in return to play are heavily individualized, and so we do not have all that access to that information, and at that point we're a little bit more in kind of uncharted territory. So having the live feedback there, I think, can be very helpful. Another thing or aspect that's nice about data is that we just provided an example of how Frank and I often chat. Auburn and I, the nutritionist, had some conversations about just in general how we can match nutritional intake with the physical demands of the game. So what I'm trying to take, or the point that I'm trying to make here, is that we can use the information to essentially just relay more or less what we know conceptually, in that we want to taper progressively into a game day and then increase the loads coming out of that. So starting with game day -3, if we use distance as a measure of physical performance, generally decreases and then increases it going away from it. It would make sense, based on this information, to then not just apply a standard one-size-fits-all nutritional strategy with the guys, but for her to emphasize to really pay attention to what we do on a day-to-day basis. And so I think one of the aspects that's been fun working with Auburn is that she was open essentially to listen and see, okay, what are we doing, and then how can she adjust her feedback to the guys, so that we're all on the same page essentially. Everybody on the team wants to win. Everybody, ranging from our equipment manager to Jay, wants that we win every single game of the season. So how can we all line up to that philosophy that Jay, Rich, and Michael propose? So it just gives another avenue to share and relay information. The final example that I wanted to make, or I thought was worthwhile discussing, because it relates to not only Frank's involvement, but then also Sam, our athletic trainer, and the rest of the medical staff, is return to play. This is just an example, not coming back from an injury, but last year we ended up being in this unfortunate situation where about 3 weeks before the ACC tournament, we had a COVID outbreak, which means that we were shut down for about 2 to 3 weeks, depending on individual players, how soon they caught COVID. And then that meant that guys either had to train in isolation, not train at all, which really screwed things up from a physical perspective, not how you want to go into an ACC tournament. It's important because we only had 2 to 7 days until our first match against Duke. And that's not a lot of time to go from what is probably very little to a 90-minute match. So one of the ways we tried to combat that challenge was by doing a submaximal fitness test. So the audience here is probably well familiar with the standard beep test. Everybody had to run one until their face was blue and they started missing 2 consecutive beeps at one point of their life. Instead of doing that, we essentially ran the test until a predetermined stage and then looked at heart rate responses. So what you see here is an example of 14 guys. So each of those bars are individual de-identified players. And you can see their progression of heart rate, so the heart rate recovery after completion of the test, with the solid line showing the return from COVID, and the dashed line showing a test that we conducted earlier in the year. So we use some of that information to then figure out, okay, how can we reintegrate the guys who seems to be way off, to provide one example, one of our center midfielders in yellow, as comparing him in yellow after COVID to himself in light blue before COVID, a little darker blue to the positional average, and in that very dark blue, the team average. So you can see that not only was his heart rate elevated at the end of the test, but his recovery, so in essence, the rate at which his heart rate dropped within the 2 minutes after the test was also worse than beforehand. So he was a guy that we very carefully reintegrated into match play, ended up not being injured, which was great, and still found a way to be on the pitch and contribute. So again, a lot of this was done, with Sam, with Frank on the pitch, running the tests, collecting the data. If I could have been there, I was there. That wasn't always the case, though. But altogether, then, this is the information that we share across all stakeholders via text messages or conversations in the office, just so that we're all on the same page. That, if we end up needing to adjust numbers, he is probably one of the guys that we would want to give some time off, and instead introduce a neutral and sort of play 7v7+1 rather than 8v8, for instance. Again, fine-tuning decisions, not telling individuals to pull him out, because that's not what we're about. It's working as a team to best accommodate what we're trying to accomplish. Yeah, I mean, really, to summarize that, then I guess we just provided a set of examples of how we've been operating, and that is, first and foremost, that everything we do is based on the philosophy of Pitt Soccer, who we are, blue collar, how we play, high press, possession-based football, and that dictates a lot of the decisions downstream. Looking at sports medicine, nutrition, strength and conditioning, and then even the academic side, we're all collecting data, and we're all trying to make that vision a reality. And so sports science just provides an avenue to communicate across those stakeholders, and then get us all on the same page, so that all together we can maximize the philosophy and really ensure that we are on the path to success. And so in a nutshell, I think that that's really what has allowed us to perform really well. And